Hey everybody, Luke Garrity here. This is going to be my Theo vlog episode number 2, and today we are going to be talking briefly about the doctrine of the Trinity because I just got this new book and it is awesome! So the doctrine of the Trinity can be a little overwhelming for a lot of people to understand. I mean, it's partly a doctrine that's been believed for nearly 2,000 years and affirmed by Christian theologians. It's also pretty complex, and you can wade into the deeper end of the theological pool very quickly if you start reading relevant literature. And so this book right here, Trinity Without Hierarchy, it is edited by Michael Bird and Scott Harrower, I believe is the pronunciation of Scott's last name. Hopefully I got that right. But Michael Bird is a biblical scholar that I have super enjoyed reading. I've read most of his books, and I've found this book to be, thus far, I'm only about halfway through, absolutely fantastic. I'll get to why this book is important in a moment here. The doctrine of the Trinity is actually discussed in a variety of different ways. Obviously, there's focus on the general aspect of Trinitarian theology, but within the branch of Trinitarian theology, there's discussions about what is called the immanent Trinity and then the economic Trinity. When people study the immanent Trinity, they're basically trying to figure out the relationship between the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. How does God exist as one being who also exists as three persons? The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. How is that possible? The immanent Trinity explores that topic, and to some degree it's quite inadequate, obviously, because it's a bunch of human beings with finite minds trying to explore and communicate adequately in an inadequate way about who God is and how he exists as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And that's generally a branch of Trinitarian theology that Christian Orthodox theologians have been studying for many years, decades, hundreds of years actually, and nearly 2,000 years. And that's how we've come to the conclusion through theological councils in the first few centuries of the church that there is one God who exists eternally as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, who are all equal in power, glory. They're all equal in their ability to be, to know everything, omnipresence. They're eternal. Basically, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are not the same persons, but are equal in all of their different divine attributes, so to speak. Now, the economic Trinity focuses on the relationship between the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit with the world. How does the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit work in context of salvation and redemption in their relationship with the world? So the immanent Trinitarian discussions are focused on the relationship between the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit in an interpersonal way, and the economic Trinity is focused on the relationship between the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit and the rest of the world. Obviously, you can tell that we are wading into the deeper end of the theological pool just by talking about that. But I want to encourage you again to take theology seriously, because there are consequences to bad theology. And I believe with all of my heart that bad theology hurts people. And this brings me to the reason why this book is so helpful. A few years ago, a number of complementarian theologians and scholars, people who believe that men and women they would say that they are equal in value, but they are not equal in the roles that they can play within the church. Complementarians do not believe, for instance, women can ever serve as pastors, senior pastors, and many of them would say that women shouldn't preach, and they point to texts like 1 Timothy chapter 2 or in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, and they identify these texts and say that, see, the Bible is clear that women should not have leadership roles, senior leadership roles. Well, a number of those complementarian scholars actually came up with this idea that you can look to the doctrine of the Trinity as an example of how the gender roles should function. And they came up with this idea called subordination. So these scholars suggested that in the same way that Jesus subordinates himself under the Father, women should subordinate themselves under men. And there was a ton of literature written by Bruce Ware. It was included in Wayne Grudem's systematic theology. It has been part and parcel to many of the arguments that complementarians make, suggesting that women should not serve in leadership roles within the church. In fact, I have heard this argument by numerous complementarians telling me that basically we need to look to the Trinity as an example for what women can and can't do. Thankfully, there was a woman by the name of Amy Bird who a few years ago recognized that there was a problem with that position. A, it wasn't very good theology, and B, it was not doing justice to the biblical texts that address the subject of the Trinity. And so she raised this question, and then a number of other systematic theologians started looking into the works of Bruce Ware and the works of Wayne Grudem, and identified that there were some problems there within their writings. So this book is helpful because what the authors and all of the contributors are doing is demonstrating that to have Nicene Orthodox Trinitarian theology, the theology that was espoused at the Council of Nicaea, to have that, you have to have Trinity without hierarchy, that the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are all equal in every aspect of their divine attributes. Furthermore, they suggest that to look to the Trinity to determine gender roles is simply crazy. That's my own word. But it is crazy. It's absolutely not a convincing argument whatsoever, and it should be abandoned by every single complementarian scholar, layperson, pastor that is out there. In fact, what's fascinating about this book is that it's actually contributed to by a number of egalitarians and complementarians that are all orthodox in their Trinitarian theology. So the complementarians are saying, hey, we're on your side, essentially, in our belief about the roles of men and women, but we should not appeal to the Trinity. And obviously the egalitarians are saying, yeah, that's what we've been saying all along, and we should also look at those texts a little bit better. There are some really good books, by the way. If you look at the description here below, you'll see some great books that I'd recommend that address the biblical, theological, they do good exegesis and really wrestle with the pastoral ramifications of why women should be encouraged to pursue the gifting that the Holy Spirit has given them. At any rate, this book is fantastic. In fact, just in the first, I guess, preface, there is a ton of really good background information. And one of the reasons why this is so important, quite frankly, is because Grudem and Ware have been extremely influential among many evangelicals, and they are holding to what Michael Bird suggests is a semi-Arian subordinationism. Now, that might seem really confusing, so let's go ahead and talk really quickly about what Arianism is and why subordinationism is leaning into an ancient heresy that actually matters in our doctrines and beliefs of the church. So the doctrine of Arianism comes from a man named Arius, and he lived sometime around 250 to about 330 AD, give or take about 5 or 6 years. He was a pastor, a priest in Alexandria, Egypt, and was a very influential preacher in his day. Essentially, he believed that Christ was the Son of God and was begotten of the Father, but was a distinct creature from the Father. And so you can already hopefully hear a problem there, because there was a distinction, actually a divide between the Father and the Son. His views were so problematic that the first really big church council, the Council of Nicaea, was called by Emperor Constantine to address the ideas that he was espousing. And actually, I've read several historians who have suggested that his influence was so great in the early church because he was a really gifted preacher. He was smart to know that singing theology was just as influential, if not more so, than the teachings. And so he had developed songs that espoused his Arian theology, his Arian Christology, so to speak. He was a pretty big deal in that period of time in church history. And that's why the early church convened in a council to figure out whether or not his ideas were worth pursuing. So the council really came down to decide between Homoousianism and Arianism. Now, some of you are probably thinking, what in the world is homoousianism? Essentially, it's the idea of same in essence, same in being. And what the early church was going to decide through this council was to figure out if Father, Son, and Holy Spirit were one in essence and one in being, or whether they were distinct in the sense of being separate beings. So the problem was that these complementarian scholars were making arguments that seemed to be suggesting a semi-Arian perspective on Jesus, because Jesus was subordinated below the Father. And if you read those writings, and they're articulated well in this book and engaged with, you'll find out that it's hard not to see that Bruce Ware and Wayne Grudem were making statements that sounded really similar to heresy, quite frankly. Now, the good news, I think, is that a number of interactions have taken place at the Evangelical Theological Society. There have been several panels where they have had interaction between Giles, a theologian who's been critiquing Grudem and Ware, and a host of other hierarchy-leaning Trinitarian scholars, between him and others. And what we have seen is it appears that Bruce Ware and Wayne Grudem have both actually recanted somewhat of their views and have identified that perhaps they shouldn't be using those arguments. So if Bruce Ware and Wayne Grudem have come to the conclusion that they should not be making hierarchy Trinitarian theology a model to use when we're having discussions about gender roles, perhaps you shouldn't as well. But I digress. Now, really quickly, I do need to point out to you that Arianism, the theology of Arius, was so influential. The Council of Nicaea met and they debated this, but there was this guy named Athanasius who stood against the entire Roman world and said, no, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are one in being, one in essence, and this is what the Bible teaches. This is what has been handed down to us from the apostles. I really like Athanasius, so much so that I wanted to name one of my children after him, but I lost that discussion with my wife. At any rate, for those of you who maybe are not interested in diving into a maybe more theologically robust academic type of book like this, I would definitely encourage you to do that, because I think it'd be a fun read. Take your time, go slow, wrestle with the implications of what the scholars are suggesting. But if you want to just maybe like wade in at the shallow end of the pool and work your way out there, I would definitely recommend that you get Fred Sanders' book, The Deep Things of God. In that book, Fred Sanders' subtitle says everything. He demonstrates how the Trinity changes everything. I also really like the book Delighting in the Trinity by Michael Reeves. I think that has a lot to offer as well. But if you really want to get into the debate between hierarchy in the Trinity and whether that's something you should even consider, I'm suggesting that you don't consider it. If you are looking to do that, though, Kevin Giles' work has been absolutely fantastic. But this book right here, it is so good. Hey, my name is Luke Garrity, and I am a pastor, a theologian, a husband, a father of 5, and I love underground hip-hop and fly fishing. But this vlog is primarily focused on theology, church, leadership, technology, and how it impacts the way that the church functions for the glory of God and the sake of God's mission. So check back often. I'm going to keep on doing these type of videos. If you have any questions, post them in the comments and I'll talk to you later.